traffic from intensifying and continuing to expand this non-conforming use. So that's why I do not support the expansion of non-conforming use. I'll see if there's any further discussion on the motion. There is none. All in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay, and that carries. I understand it seems that there are some confusion about that, so we'll have our attorney and staff available for follow-up on those. And we do still have one more item left on our agenda. It's a presentation and discussion of staff's report, a preliminary report on their housing inventory they've been working on. Councilmember Fry and I gave a staff direction related to this during last year's budget presentations and discussions of housing, and staff and long-range planning along with our housing group within CPAD have been working closely together on this, and there's a lot more to come, but this is just a preliminary presentation of some new tools and analysis that staff has done, and I think they would welcome further direction from this and the CDRS committee on further steps. So with that, Ms. Munson.
Thank you. Chair Steve Munson, Director of Long Range Planning. So just want to begin with an introduction, and then I'm going to pass it off to Brian Schaefer, who's really been managing this process. Over the last 2 years, Long Range Planning has endeavored to grow our capacity in civic technology and research in 3 ways. 1, through additional data procurement. 2, through additional software and visualization, and particularly through our partnership with IT. And 3rd, by adding skills, and that has been accomplished through training, through hiring temporary employees to add skills to certain projects, and additional research assistance. This has all been facilitated, I have to say, through a substantially growing relationship with information technology. To ensure that the housing inventory would be a practical tool and not just sort of a research engine, the team worked closely with colleagues in the housing division to explore the data and identify a set of outcomes and measures that could be applied in a way that was useful to our housing program. The inventory has utilized data, software, skills, and multi-departmental teaming to their full potential. So there's a lot of sweat equity in the product. Since much of the project was achieved through proactive coordination of enterprise time and talent and leveraging enterprise investments, the outcome was also achieved at a very modest cost. And with that, I'll introduce Brian Schaefer, who managed this process from beginning to end. He will present the outcomes this morning. Or actually, now it's not morning anymore, is it? Maybe.
Thank you. I want to be respectful of your time, and I really appreciate having the opportunity to present and show you some of this information today, but also we'll try to keep it moving along. So just a reminder where we started from. Back in 2015, as you mentioned, Councilmember Bender, you and Councilmember Fry gave a direction in the budget process to complete a housing analysis of existing housing and housing needs in Minneapolis to inform future policy decisions, including looking at the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, looking at TOD programs, as well as looking at possible policy recommendations around inclusionary zoning. As a reaction to that, we've been moving diligently through creating a housing inventory. This intent of this tool is really to create a stable and ongoing comprehensive understanding of housing. So as Chair Steve mentioned, we are purposely trying to create something that can be automated and reused over and over again, and not as a study that just happens one-off. It's not a study on housing demand. It's specifically not a study on the housing needs. That's work that needs to come in the future. But it does provide a baseline information and inform that information. It is our intent right now that a lot of that analysis and work will happen around the comprehensive plan process, which will be really kicking off in earnest this beginning of 2016. So what really is this? This is really a series of data sets that are spatially referenced. So kind of the graphic allows you to kind of visualize that. It's not the best graphic to use, but the graphic basically shows that we have a lot of different opportunities to layer data on top of itself. To really start to see patterns, start to really answer some deeper research questions, a lot of things more than you can just do from simple observation. So it's the kind of the tool to bring all that data together and also make it accessible. There's different levels of skill and access to different data sets throughout the city, especially with some of our data sets that are kind of buried in some of our larger tables that are really more accessible from IT and really our research staff. and trying to put them in the hands of users such as our housing staff and others to really spend a lot more time with that data and not have to spend as much time doing the gathering information, but actually looking at it and synthesizing and making informed decisions. We also procured a couple other data sets for this site process, and additionally created and developed a couple data sets. And a bulk of our work and a bulk of what I'll show you today will be a demonstration of some of the work that we've assembled and done ourselves in-house with the help of many staff. So who was involved? CPED Long Range Planning led this process. We worked with the Ward 10 office, and between the Ward 10 office and our department, we brought in an intern named Elliot Altbaum. He's sitting here. He's the kind of the mastermind behind the model of estimating market rents, and really has been leading off a lot of that element of this work, which is a significant achievement. The CPED Housing Policy and Development, we've been working closely with that division within CPED, understanding their needs, trying to understand how we can show data and represent the data and set us up for good discussions and analysis in the future. The assessor's office has been instrumental, and also because one, we're using significant amounts of their data, but also understanding how they do their own models for valuation, so we could use that as a basis of understanding. And ultimately, information technology, as Chair C mentioned, we've relied heavily on existing investments, both in technology, which we'll show you today, but also in staff. Stacy Blakowski, a data scientist, I think is here today. This is when we show the demonstration we'll show in a minute or two. She's behind what you see there. And a lot of the data analysis we were able to do and transformation of data to make it work. So it's been a really strong partnership, and really couldn't have done it without their help. Before we get into a little bit of a demonstration, just want to talk about the main data sets. This is covered in the RCA, but just want to identify it. We kind of looked at 4 major buckets of information. One is property physical characteristics, so the condition, the age of properties, the type of buildings, the number and distribution of housing units. In fact, we haven't ever, in the time I've been here, almost 10 years now, done an analysis to look at what's the distribution of units. So what you see in the table on the right of this, in this presentation, is the first time we've actually pulled this together at the city data using the assessor's office data. So we now know we have 11,000 studio units throughout the city, and 44,618 3-bedroom units. So just understanding our current supply was one of the major elements of this work. Moving forward, we worked in developing kind of understanding market and property values, the estimated rent, which we'll show you in a moment. Also looking at just estimated market value, which is also paramount to the work we're showing today. Understanding permit values and investments, and a lot of other data that we're not showing here, but are listed in the RCA to really understand, again, a full picture of what's going on in our communities and with our housing stock. Additionally, understanding where the legally binding affordable housing is, along with senior housing, and other supportive and transitional housing options. So we really have that full holistic view of housing. As I mentioned before, the idea that we can layer data is really important, and the idea of layering a lot of this physical structural data about the units themselves overlaid with a lot of the demographic data that we can gather from the census will allow us to do a fairly robust analysis at a much higher level than we've done before. And so we've put together about a lot of data through the census, but really the sky's the limits with bringing in that kind of demographic information. So kind of the major portion of this work, the thing that's taking the bulk of the time, is this development of a tool to estimate and model to estimate market rents. So with the leadership within CPED and with the extensive work by Elliot Altbaum and Stacy, we developed a model to estimate rents for every unit in Minneapolis. We did that using a regression model, starting with about 14,000 rental listings from 2014. So our data is all showing 2014 data. It's not showing 2015 rents, 2014 rents. And it's estimated based on 4 conditions, really building age, the condition assigned by the assessor, and the number of bedrooms, so the unit size. And then there is an adjustment factor for location. As we all understand, real estate is kind of based on location. We've organized this data. The way the model kicks out data, it kicks out the information in the actual dollar cost per unit. We've organized this data into using the HUD's affordable housing bands, or affordability based on bands that are used by the Met Council and by HUD. So we're looking at bands of 30, 50, 80, 100, and 115% of area median income. So it's using the regional methodology for setting rents, especially for how we set rents in new development projects. So it's really our intent to put an apples to apples comparison to the projects that we'd be building today or assisting in the development of for affordable housing. In doing this, we also were able to increase our confidence in our data sets. So at a citywide amount, we're about 90 to 97% confident in the data. So that means there's some places where there's a margin of error of about 3%, which is similar when you do some estimation. Census data has also margins of errors. And then at the community level, as you lower the geography down, our confidence level decreases a little bit. We're constantly trying to improve that through the work. And hopefully in a few more iterations down the road, we can reduce that, increase that confidence level and allow us to go down to a lower geography. Right now, we show information for a parcel level, but it's at aggregate at a community levels where our accuracy is, our confidence is stronger. So with that, I'm going to jump over to a system that and it's still not showing fabulously on your screens. I'm going to show one other option to see if we can make that better. I think that shows up a little bit better. This can be optimized for the screen. It's actually optimized for most of the desktops, screens you have in your offices, and trying to do it through the projectors just creates a little bit of a challenge. But what I want to do is quickly walk you through the tool and then demonstrate a couple of our primary observations and key takeaways. So just to orient you on the page, it's not showing perfectly. I can tell you it's much more elegant when it's not being projected from a laptop onto a screen. But this upper left-hand corner allows you to choose all units within Minneapolis, just multifamily units, single-family ownership, and single-family rental. The chart here shows the distribution of those units across those bands of affordability. It provides the count. So for instance, it provides at the city level, we know that we have 92 studio apartments at 30% AMI. These are, again, naturally occurring affordable housing. These are not legally binding. This doesn't include projects that have Affordable Housing Trust Fund or other HUD dollars or other programmatic dollars that create a legally binding unit for a period of time. So what it shows right now is you can go across the whole count, and it shows we have 192,777 units of housing within Minneapolis, and then the distributions within that. On the right is a map. All these things are dynamic, and it's important they're dynamic because if without this tool, we'd be looking at 25 pages of individual maps with charts, and now it can all be done interactively on screen. And our intent is to be rolling this out to screens both in the council's offices and throughout CPED at this point in time for use and understanding and working through that. In the lower left is a chart basically showing a proportion of that housing base divided by the 12 communities within Minneapolis. We use community level, aggregated up from neighborhood level as our basis for this. So a couple just general demonstrations of the tool, but really to show some of our findings is looking at what is affordable at different bands of affordability. And so thinking about this, what I've done is looked at all the housing units within Minneapolis that are affordable to people making 80% or less of the area median income. And that varies based on the unit, based on the household size. But in this information shows that roughly 71% of the city Minneapolis units are affordable at 80% or below. It should be noted that while they may be affordable, doesn't necessarily mean they're available. This doesn't necessarily mean that one, they're for rent or for ownership opportunity currently, and it also doesn't imply that who's using those units. So it very well could be that people that have higher incomes are using these units, so it doesn't really speak to demand for these units, but just kind of giving you an overall understanding of the importance of that, or that difference between available and accessible, I guess is what this would be, accessible units in that regard. You can see here the map on the right shows the different colors. So the pink shows properties that are affordable at 30% AMI. The black or the gray shows 50% AMI, and 80% AMI is in green. And you can scroll down and see that it's showing that the largest amount of, pardon me, trying to steer up there is a little challenging, that 93% of all the housing units in Powderhorn are affordable, and that they also have about 23 or 17% of all units that are affordable at those three bands.
Mr. Schaefer, can you remind me if this is both ownership and rental?
This is ownership and rental, and I'll show you the difference quickly. And it's actually, that's where we start to see some more interesting observations that I'll share with you today. So by clicking on the radio button, the multifamily, we can see that differently. So this shows all the multifamily units affordable at these different bands of affordability. So roughly 74% of all the multifamily housing is constructed in Minneapolis is affordable at 80% or below based on our analysis. You can really see when you look at the multifamily that how the importance of some of the, especially in the south part of the city, both the south and southwest sectors, the importance of those community corridors and commercial corridors where you see those streaks of housing going south, really looking at kind of the importance of that development area, those being very quite affordable units in the city, and speaks to also their era of construction. Most of those haven't been constructed in the last 10 years. You can also see some clusters of affordability in like Linden Hills, especially the downtown with 43rd and Upton area of Linden Hills, and other portions within the city. I'm going to move over to a kind of another assumption of a case study. So assuming that you are a family of 4 or 5 and looking for a 3-bedroom unit, we could start with all units. I'm going to go back up to the radio dial here. So it's selecting all. And by clicking on 3 bedrooms alone, we can now just see those 3-bedroom units in that distribution. So in this case, within the city, we have 44,618 3-bedroom units within the city, and you can kind of start to see the distribution of those. And now let's assume that you're a household of making 80% of the area median income, so about $65,000, and we can kind of see what would be available to you. So by doing a little bit more clicking, pardon me if so here we can now see, I'm going to scroll down just a little bit so you have a better view of the map. The units that are affordable to you, making 80% or below area median income as a 3-bedroom. So this is assuming you're a family of 4 or 5 looking for housing units. And when you look at it originally, you can see at a citywide, it seems quite robust of where those units are. But when you look down through different distributions, you can look at multifamily. So thinking you want to live in an apartment. And for this case, I should let you know, multifamily is everything 2 units and more. So this includes duplexes and triplexes and quadplexes or 4 units and above. We can break that data down differently, but for the sake of demonstration on the screen, this works for us. So at multifamily, you can see where those units would be available. Again, at the specific parcel, they may not be completely confident that that unit specifically is affordable, but within that community, within that region, this is a good distribution of the spatial distribution of those units. And you can kind of see that it really speaks to how we included duplexes and triplexes in this as they kind of move out from the city versus other situations. But now let's look at that and think I'm looking to now rent a home, and we can go down and look at single family rental. So this is looking at single family homes that are now, or that are not homesteaded, that are actually up for rental. And you can see a vast difference. And you can see a very high concentration in the Camden and near north communities. You can see a concentration in the northeast and the south sector. The city, southwest neighborhoods have less rental at this point. But it speaks to the units that are available. You went from looking at an apartment or a multifamily at about 6,000 units available to you. When you look at a rental option, you have about 5,100 units across the city that would be accessible to you at this income. But when you contrast that with single-family ownership, it paints even a different picture. And you see a broad jump in the number of units that are available at single-family ownership. And it speaks to a couple different spatial patterns. You can see along the south side of the city in Southwest, there's a ring probably about south of 54th or 56th Street, going across 35W up around Nokomis, including a lot of South, Longfellow neighborhoods, Nokomis neighborhoods, Powder neighborhoods, Fairmont Northeast, and then you can see a pretty high concentration in the near North and Camden neighborhoods. And when we looked at that, that showed us we had some questions about this. We use estimated market value as the basis for our assumptions under the cost of ownership. It's different than the way we model it for rental. And so there's some assumptions that come into that data set. Then in validation of that work, we see that estimated market value is actually fairly close proximity for the right years for the sales that happened. So assuming 2014 sales and 2013. So 2013, over 3 years rate of sales were fairly close to the estimated market value that we predicted, or the assessors predicted. In doing that, you can kind of think about the cost of ownership versus the cost of rental and kind of see why the market may have acted the way it did several years ago, where large investors came into North Minneapolis or other areas and picked up properties because rents may have been actually, you can make more money renting it than you could actually in cost of ownership. I'm going to show you one other element and then open up for questions and be respectful of your time here. I just want to demonstrate, assuming another kind of case, if you will, that you are a individual making 50% of the AMI, so you're making 50% of the median area income. So that's about $29,000 a year. That $29,000 a year is somewhere just slight south of $15 an hour as a average or a rent or a week daily wage. So if you looked at just the 50% units, at one bedroom, those would be your options. And a studio is probably a better example to show you. So these are the studio units that are available. So roughly we have about 7,400 units available at that level, and it starts to talk about the supply of those units and where they're located. So you can see the outreach of where we have studio development, very similar to the core of Minneapolis. It doesn't really radiate out into the kind of the deeper, farther out neighborhoods. And you can also understand that it'd be about 7,400 units that you could choose to live in within the city based on our analysis. So kind of the takeaways really is that this is kind of right now just starting to show some of our observations. We have more analysis to do. This really serves as a tool to, over the next year, to really dig into policy questions, start to use this as the basis for those policy questions. You can see that when we looked at the multifamily housing in Minneapolis, that especially as you went to the regions in Camden, farther up in north, areas in Nokomis and Southwest, where the multifamily housing along neighborhood corridors and community and commercial corridors really serves as a strong creating a housing choice and housing option, at least from affordability standpoints within the community that are more homogeneous with single family homes. It gives us more opportunity to think about our assumptions about what we think might be affordable when you think about 30% being what the standard is that a family could afford to pay towards rent. And it opens up a lot of other questions. I'm going to jump to the presentation again real quick, just to end up the slides, and we can come back to the So kind of our next steps with this tool is really a lot of this research we're housing under the city's comprehensive plan. Here are just a few of the things that when we first started this project, we started to identify a list of questions that we'd probably want to answer internally. This doesn't at all include the global list of within the city enterprise or as a council what you might be interested in fully in, but I want to investigate where and what kind of housing options are within the city, both affordability, but also just the types of bedrooms. When we looked at 3 bedrooms, there's not many 3-bedroom units that are multifamily. There's much more 3-bedroom units that are single family homes. So how we're moving and growing into as a city, especially downtown as an example of 3-bedroom units, there aren't many there. We don't know what the demand would be there for that, but just looking at creating housing options. Investigating naturally occurring affordable housing, we need to understand more about why some of these properties are naturally occurring. Will they remain naturally occurring as time passes, or will those units start to rise in price and rise out of some of those affordability bands? Looking at the relationship of the housing stock and the characteristics of other census data. So how is household size related to the household stock? So are we having areas where we have a lot larger household sizes or smaller household sizes based on the number of bedrooms we have in these units? Looking at ages of the people that might be living in there, looking at the presence of children, different ages and brackets of children, and income. A lot of these start to answer or start to get into larger long-range planning conversations. I look at both our nexus of our land use policy, transportation policies, housing policy, and probably broader policy questions. Started to look at how this housing stock it relates to the measures of housing stability in neighborhoods, indicators that the state is already using for looking at stability, and looking at where changes have occurred. So where is rent changing? Where are the buildings being modified? Where are bedrooms being added? Where are they being removed? Getting to those questions. So with the data, our next steps are really looking at cleaning and organizing the data to further increase its accessibility. We have still a lot of work to get done on that regard, and also working with our partners in IT to look at ways to visualize more of this data. So just like what you saw in that tool earlier, that data can be brought to your fingertips without having to have be a data scientist or have a degree in data analysis. Looking at also putting together some summary reports of some of this information as our analysis continues, so that there's kind of a quick snapshots of what we're seeing and how we can move that forward. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions and open up the model again and talk about that if you'd like.
Thank you. Council President has a question.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. When you're talking about naturally occurring affordable housing,
yeah.
One of the things obviously that's been a challenge is that for communities in North Minneapolis is that we have a huge concentration of all of the Section 8, and not all, but I mean way more than our share if it was distributed equally across the city. And so when you say naturally occurring, it really isn't unless you're thinking or having that dynamic in mind of the Section 8 certificate driving up rents. Because perhaps the naturally what really I would define as naturally occurring, you're going to get a lower rent in these neighborhoods. And that to me has driven some of the conversions that have happened and destabilized neighborhoods. And so it isn't naturally occurring, it's government occurring. So I really want us to acknowledge that in the work that we do. I have in my head that I've got a file this thick on history on Section 8 in North Minneapolis, and I think if I remember correctly, and these are probably 5 or 6 year old statistics, that 1 in 4 units of rental housing in North Minneapolis are government supported Section 8 or another program. There are what did I run across? Some county program. It's group housing, GH something or other. I can't think of the name of it now, but I find these just serendipitously and find out, exactly, who's paying the rent. And in many cases, it's us, it's the government. And so I really want that kind of work in this plan. The other thing that I think it's important to acknowledge about North Minneapolis in particular is that there isn't much multifamily housing. Historically, these neighborhoods were very, very residential. And so when you look along the commercial corridors probably an exaggeration in some ways about what those corridors are. But Penn Avenue North, if you look at it, has really been single family with the exception of some, maybe 2- and 3-story buildings maximum. So the naturally occurring multifamily in North Minneapolis is very, very small. What we have is single family homes pretty much. And so sort of the neighborhood history is important also in the look at what we're trying to figure out here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Reich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment. I think this is one of those tools that we're going to time and time again for a period. We're going to say, wow, this is so great and useful to have our conversations move forward with this as a backdrop. And then as time passes, I think there will be people that will follow us and go, how do they ever make decisions or have policy discussions without it? Mm-hmm. So I think it's just one of these little watershed moments where this work is going to serve the city well, and I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a final comment, and I know we're well into our time here, but I thank you so much for this work. I agree with Councilmember Reich. This is the information that I've been wanting as we have all of these questions and discussions about housing. So I think it'll be extremely useful as we move forward. So this is the supply side, which we've been missing, I think, more than anything else. But how will we be able in the future, just very briefly, to match this with the demand side? And how can we use this information to try to sort of right size our policies as we move forward? Because that's really what I would like us to move toward, is to say, okay, what's available in the market today? What do we expect our demand to be in the future at different levels of affordability? What are our needs? And then how do we create policies that address those needs? So perhaps we have a need to look at ways that we could protect housing affordability the way it is now. Or perhaps we have big gaps that we need to fill, or maybe there are dysfunctions in our market if you look at specific geographies, which we've identified. And I think council members and staff know anecdotally, but how can we use more data, this paired with the demand side as we move forward?
Thank you, Chair Bender. I personally may not be able to answer the entire question there. We do have Andrea Brennan and the managers from Housing Development or Housing Policy and Development to probably talk a little bit more about that. But as a partnership with our long-range planning within CPED as a whole, we've been looking at trying to figure out a little bit of what is Met Council projecting for us in 2040. What is our demographic going to look like? It's a challenge to get down to understanding what that unit affordability is. We've had the goals set by the Livable Communities Act that we work with the goals for the housing, kind of the requirements in the housing